This is Hidden, a podcast about things unknown.
My name, I was born in a cabin in Illinois, and everybody thinks my parents started this company, and they didn't. They like the one. Are you still around? Yeah, we're still around. But my parents didn't start the company. I did.
What you are hearing is audio from a documentary videoed in 2017 with the late puppeteer Bob Kramer.
Start doing little shows and things, and then my godmother that lived next door would write little stories, and then we'd kind of do shows for birthday parties, that sort of thing in the family. So when I was in
The documentary is about Bob Kramer's marionettes and was not released to the public.
high school, I started doing
The video was put on hold while videoing a series of 12 episodes per Bob's request on how to create a marionette or puppet. In this episode, we hear from Bob regarding the art and process of puppetry. We will also hear from Doug Felch, Bob's partner and fellow puppeteer, with excerpts from his own podcast, That's My Story and I'm Sticking to It, regarding the importance of puppetry.
we like to show the children, especially any adults, but the children mainly, that what we do isn't coming out and manufactured in a factory somewhere. We make everything here. The patterns, so they have a thought of, oh, this takes a long time.
Puppetry is defined as an art of operating puppets by strings controlled from above or by hand, sometimes with an actor operating from within the puppet. Puppetry involves dance, some dialogue and music, and by definition is considered theater activity for children. According to Doug Felch, it means something more.
The one, I don't know if this is where to start with puppetry, it's always been, I always say that if there is a problem with puppetry, it's been, sometimes it's connection with magic. And people of a certain intelligence, because they think they're so smart, they don't like being fooled. And what does magic do? It fools you. What does puppetry do? It brings you to a point in your mind of your suspension of disbelief and using your imagination and getting involved in the show. Well, if you don't have that ability or don't want to go there, you poo-poo it. Oh, it's just for children. Well, the Salzburg Marionettes for 50, 60 or more years did all the Mozart operas. They did not like Sound of Music, but being business people, and of course they're from Salzburg, do Sound of Music with the marionettes. And it was, obviously commercially very successful. But that, like I say, some people they hear the word magic and they're all weird and scary, but there's magic in the day. There's magic in looking at clouds. There's magic at seeing someone for the first time and connecting with them. That's magic to me. That's special. That's who we are. We are not just physical beings. We are spiritual. And we have a mind that is so incredible. And to box that in, or put puppetry and magic and things in a box and close it up and say, I don't believe in that, what a loss. And what happens with children? Sometimes that creativity and imagination is kind of drummed out of them because it's not nurtured. If you don't fertilize the plants, you're not going to have trouble. And if you don't put thoughts of creativity and wonder and love in the soup, it's just not going to appear. It's got to be put in. And I think, and with this computer age, this artificial intelligence, they've said it can be a great mentor to students because it's like having a person there, but that artificial intelligence has to be created as a caring, loving, nurturing person, which in some cases not all teachers are.
One more time. Perky and happy. Hi, I'm Bob.
And I'm Doug.
And we're puppeteers.
Yes, we build and perform with puppets.
Now, there's all kinds of different puppets, but we prefer the marionette.
Best of all.
In December of 2022, the Kramer Marionettes Behind the Scenes with Bob and Doug series was released on YouTube. The series was an 11-minute show on how to create marionettes. Although they had been involved in documentaries and media interviews, this show idea was conceived by Bob Kramer and something he had wanted to do for some time. Bob's inspiration for the show design was from a 10-minute cake baking show streaming online. Bob outlined visually in 12 episodes the steps of making marionettes, everything from drawing, wood carving, clay molds to plaster molds, painting, costuming, stringing the marionette, and operating the controls were discussed and demonstrated. We hear more from Bob on the process.
Our characters take thousands of hours. They take thousands of hours per character to build, and I'm constantly doing little tiny drawings and books and that sort of thing. And then when I'm ready to do an act or do a show, I go back through all these different drawings and stuff, thousands of pages of stuff, and I look through them and I kind of, that's a neat little character, and I'll base the character on one of the stories, on one of those little characters I drew, and then kind of keep drawing it and drawing it. Once I get it kind of set up with a little tiny one, like a 2 or 3 little drawing, then we have to do a scale drawing. And sometimes even then when we do the scale drawing, it changes a little bit because it has to, the proportions and how it's going to work and that sort of thing it just has to function. And sometimes the way you have the little drawing built, it's nice and it's a nice picture, but it is not going to work out. So we have the, like as Doug said, we have the front profile and the side profile of everything, the legs, arms, hands, and feet. And sometimes the hands don't meet up with the way the front of the thumb and everything works, and so you have to kind of stretch and adjust things. Sometimes we cut the hands out of styrofoam just to make sure they're going to work, because the wood we use is poplar and it's expensive, and you can make a mistake. Ooh. We do all the drawings, and each character has its own scale drawing, so we have almost 1,000 characters, so we have all those drawings rolled up in rubber bands. We don't really refer to them that much, but the patterns for the legs and hands and feet we kind of go back to and say, I did that in 1987 or something, and I get a couple of packages of the arms out, and can kind of base things that we do now on what we did then. It's like with the eyelashes, we have the men and the women eyelashes, and it's like you get one out. Yes, what did you do? When we do the eyelashes, we get the patterns out, and there's so many, like 300 or 400 different eyelashes for the girls, and you pull them out. Occasionally I make new ones, but you find them after a while. The eyelashes are so similar that you can pull them out and adjust them, make them the same. So when you're first starting out, it's a new character and another new one and another new one. But then after a while, it builds up, and you have all this reference you can go back to. But the characters, since it takes so long to build them, you have to believe that what you're starting out with is going to wind up looking decent and nice, and the audience is going to like it. And it takes so long, sometimes 5 or 6 years. Some of the characters we're finishing now have been around for 11 years. Then you get them out and you go, that was nice. And then you go, we're painting things differently now, so thank goodness you didn't do it then, because you'd want to repaint it now. I've gotten to the point, though, that when we do a show and it's done, I kind of leave it the way it was. I go, I got to fix this, fix that. Well, no, it should be the way it was, because that's what the show is, and you're changing it, and it's a whole different show. the way we design the puppets, the way we build them is always stay the same. We model the heads in clay. Our armatures are all the same. They're wood, and then it takes sometimes it takes a couple days, sometimes it takes weeks to model a head. I usually, before we're going to mold a head, I get it done, and I come back the next day and I look at it. Oh, it's not right. It needs a few adjustments. So then I go back to it, and then. But once it's okay, then we kind of smooth it off, and then we start doing the plaster molds, that sort of thing. On the tree, we didn't. It was something completely different because we had to incorporate a rubber face into the hard celastic puppet that was the body, and we had never done that before. It was like really crazy, and it worked out, but it's like, well, we're supposed to do this in the show, and we're talking about doing this in the show to everybody, and we got to get it done, but we got it done. It was okay. But we kept working on it, and it's like I didn't know how to tackle building it and that sort of thing, but we got it. It was, and then once that's done, now if we have to do that again, we know exactly how to go about it. But we've built just about everything, birds and people and all kinds of animals, and so when we're going to be doing a new one, we kind of know how to tackle and that sort of thing, and the bodies and that sort of stuff. And when you build a puppet, you never expect to be building another one and another one and another one. It's like the one only original, that sort of thing. And we have little things that happen during the show, but nothing really disastrous. We had one Christmas show, we had Santa get up from his chair and he left his legs behind, and they're like, we had to put him quickly back down. No, I don't think it was like, oh, we're going to put him back down. He did the show sitting in the chair the whole time. Little things like that, but we really don't have that much anymore. A friend kept talking about how when we do new puppets, like the hands come off, the legs come off, and so now I'm very careful about, okay, we put the plastic wood over the nails, we cover the nails with celastic, we really have to do it heavy duty so that nothing really falls off. Because the new puppet will always constantly come apart. So when you're doing a new one, you have to really make sure it's together. It seems like after a couple years, that's that, and they're all set, and they never come apart.
Building the puppet again, starting with the imagination and creativity, doing a sketch or a drawing, and then going back to it and saying, oh, I think I'll do this one, and then make a scale drawing of it, and this becomes like a pattern, and we do a front view and a profile view of the character, and then the patterns for the different puppet parts are taken from this drawing, and then the head is sculpted out of clay, and then we make a plaster mold, and we put a material in called celastic, similar to paper mache, but it's cloth and plastic, so it's much, much stronger. This is laid into the mold, and when it dries, you could almost pound a nail in with it. It's very, very hard. And then it's covered with plastic wood, and then sanded, because trick isn't but I say the trick of our puppets is the secret is, again, having that hard surface and then painting it. So many puppets that some people do, they're like the old ventriloquist figures that were just so grotesque because they were roughly chiseled and then paint slapped on them, and they were kind of scary looking, actually, a lot of them. But they were made by people who weren't necessarily artists. They just did whatever. And but getting that hard surface, and then it's covered with gesso and sanded, gesso sanded, and then the first coat of paint goes on. Then the eyes and mouth, are articulated. Then the final painting is done. Then the wigs are created. Then the body is celastic. The arms and legs, hands and feet are hand carved out of wood, and with patterns taken from that original scale drawing. And then the costume is designed and created and fitted to the character. And then a control has to be designed if it's a marionette. And then the stringing of the puppet, which can have up to, the puppets from India, many of them have just one string. They just bobble around. And I always say, too, puppetry in a way is like, in a way like food. The first pizza you have is what you think, well, that's what pizza is. And luckily, my first experience with pizza was fantastic. They were true, wonderful Italians with a lot of oregano and Italian sausage. It was just great, and that was always pizza to me. And other people find cracker crust with ketchup and hamburger on it and American cheese. Wow, this is great pizza. And I'm like, no, this is not great pizza. This is horrible. But anyhow, and so when all the pieces are done, then the life starts, because then you bring the character to life. And my classic line is, someone once said, well, how can you call puppetry live entertainment? I said, as long as my hand is up in that puppet or I'm controlling the strings, the puppet is alive, because the idea of transforming your life force and character, your personality and your talent, down through the strings or up through your hand into the character, this is what brings it to life and makes it so very special and unique.
And we're always improving. When we built the Aladdin show, we had problems with the joints because I was used to making little characters and that sort of thing. And the Aladdin show was, like I said, 4 or 5 feet tall, and they were heavy and they're big. And the trunk fiber was thin, so we found a place and had to replace all the joints because the trunk fiber was so thick, so thin. So we found a thicker stuff, and we were in our rooms sawing trunk fiber and replacing the joints, that sort of thing. And so when we got through all that stuff and built the Thailand show, they were built a little bit different. But even Thailand was built in 1980, and so since then things have changed so much since we have different controls and that sort of thing. So we're all constantly learning and improving and that sort of stuff.
2 stories. One, a little girl was interviewed because they made the puppet, wrote the story, made the puppet, and then performed. And it was a whole class, each in 5 different schools. And they were being interviewed. A little girl was interviewed from the 3rd grade. And Robin Smith said, well, what did you learn? She said, well, I learned how to make a puppet. And I'm like, okay. And then she said, no, I learned how to work with people. Hallelujah. That's the whole joy of the theater. That, okay, there's a star, but everybody in the play is important or they wouldn't be there. So it's that coming and working with the creative people. One little boy says, I'm not making no puppet. And I guess I was in a very good mood that day and said, okay, you don't have to make a puppet if you don't want to. Okay. I said, but we're going to need sound effects for this show. I could do that. The boy was absolutely brilliant. Teacher later said he did a 180. He calmed down. He was kind of caused trouble in the classroom and everything else, and he just came out. He shed that bad side, and really, and the other children, she said, liked him because he did a good job and so on and so forth. So it was just a wonderful healing experience. And these are the things that we need more of in the school.
We're trying to bring up the 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds so that they appreciate opera, they appreciate classical music. And like I said, they get that in an indirect way that they don't know they're getting that. And we hear a new classical piece of music, oh, that'd be good to do. And then we're trying to think, what can we use with that in one of our shows and that sort of thing. And we use classical music in our Marvin show, Marvin Musical Review, too, just for to get them all the time into that music.
In an earlier episode regarding traditional basket making, we learned that materials can become obsolete. They are no longer easy to obtain due to environment changes or a restriction, such as property ownership. For building marionettes, Bob ran into similar issues.
The materials we use are, the poplar for wood carving, and then we did start out with a material called celastic, and then that was eliminated over 20 years ago. So we went into another material, and it had to be such a harsh chemical. We used this other material. We had to use 2 pair of rubber gloves, a mask, and fans, and it was just really dreadful. So now they brought out the new Celastic, which is great because it's very, very similar to the old Celastic, so it doesn't use as harsh a chemical. The head, like, because we want them to last so long, the heads have to be very durable, and so now we're using the Celastic, and it's working out pretty well. But we have to deal with a lot of business going out of business, so then we have to find another supplier or change our, like Celastic was discontinued. Oh, well, what do we do now? It's like, oh dear. But usually something turns up. The plaster is still the same, and thank goodness we have a local supplier of the one plaster we use. A lot of the people that do puppets don't have that. They have to send for plaster and have it delivered and that sort of stuff. The plaster stayed the same. The wood now we have to get from out of town, but luckily we know where to go in Chicago. We get our poplar now because it's become so expensive, and the people they have it for flooring, but they don't have it in the 4 inches by 8 inches thickness that we use for the hands and that sort of thing. So we have to go out of town for that. But then other things, most of our fabric now comes from out of town. There's very few fabric stores left in St. Louis. But we can still get the basic fabric, muslin, that sort of thing. So it's kind of, in the eyelashes that we used to be made out of, they used to be made out of inner tubes, old inner tube. And since they don't make those, now we had to scout around for another supplier of that sort of thing, and we found a good supplier of that. So it's just to keep. I think it keeps your mind going. What are we gonna do now? Because we don't have that material, that sort of thing. And when I first started making the puppets, they were made out of enamel because acrylic paint didn't exist then. Yeah, which seems strange, but anyway, but it did not exist, and so. When the acrylic paint, latex paint came out, I was really hesitant to use it because I thought it was not going to hold up, and it was kind of bad. But after a couple years, not just a couple days, but a couple years, I eventually started using the water-based paints, and that's what we use now all the time. We don't use enamel except on some of our props, that sort of thing, but we don't use oil-based paints at all anymore. Yeah, you have to just keep working with what's available, that sort of thing. That they eliminate some colors and that sort of thing, but
For decades, Bob Kramer's Marionettes housed a theater in St. Louis, Missouri, and entertained the public with puppet shows. Some of the marionettes or puppets were used so frequently they became favorites and associated with every show. Characters such as Charlie the Caterpillar or Marvin the Moose were 2 of many favorites.
We still use some of the characters we built in 1968, 67, and Charlie's been around since 1963. The original Charlie, he was built on a spring, which they don't make anymore, so now we have to have substitutes. It's not quite the same. Charlie and Susie and Marvin are over like 50 years old. And so we have the great-great-grandchildren coming in now, and they see Charlie the way they saw it. The grandparents would see it when they were children, and now they bring their great-great-children and they can see Charlie and Marvin and Susie's was the first, and Susie's older, 50 years old too. And the first show, Charlie started out as a worm, a pink worm, and he was in an apple, and he was not the act we do now. He popped out of an apple, and he had the top of the apple as his hat, and it was okay. And his antenna, the little balls on it were made out of fishing floats, and they broke. And I felt it was bad, but now they're wood. And I don't know why I put the feathers on. We just put feathers on him one day, and he's green now, and he has a little pink in the middle of him. And so we built another one, and we had to duplicate the pink in the middle and that sort of thing, which you can't really do. The first one was, there was really no light paint, and he was kind of done in black light. And so we had to dye the fabric ourselves. And it was stiff, but after a couple of weeks, it kind of softened up, that sort of thing. But it was, again, it was a very bad chemical thing. Now they have the water-based dyes and things that we can use, and the water-based black light paint, so it's much easier.
In January of 2023, the world tragically lost Bob Kramer and the Bob Kramer Marionettes Theater to a fire. Doug was rescued from the fire by fire crews and suffered smoke inhalation. Doug is still working with marionettes, puppeteers, and education in puppetry. Here are some final words and lessons from the late Bob Kramer and survivor Doug Felch.
So after we've been doing this a long time, and it's one profession that you can't really learn from a classroom. You can be taught the basics of puppetry, but it's one of those things where you have to almost work with another puppeteer, and unless you're like me and nuts and stay with this and kind of like, oh, it's horrible, and cut your hands and all sorts of crazy things. But you learn something from actually working with a functioning performing puppet theater, as opposed to someone who teaches it and says, now when you do this, you do that, and when you bring them out on the stage, you walk across the stage, and it's nice. But when you're actually performing in front of an audience, that's what we're trying to do here with apprentices, to get them used to, oh, you have to do the show. And then after you've done the show, then you can talk about what you did wrong, what you did great, and then go on from there, as opposed to just talking about it, because you never really learn that from a book. It's like acting, that sort of thing. You have to really go out and perform in front of an audience and get that out there. So we try to get the idea when we do our demonstration that what you do now isn't what you're going to be possibly doing, years from now. You have to keep learning new things. I laugh inside, not at people, but they say, oh, I'm 20 years old now, I know everything there is to know about puppetry, and I don't need to learn anything more, and I don't know. Well, I'm still learning, and I think anyone who says that, then after a couple of years, they, oh, I'm still learning stuff, I guess you were right. So I'm like,
My favorite story about shadow puppets. The Emperor of China, hundreds of years ago, had many wives, but his first wife was his favorite wife, and he loved her dearly. And she died, and he was inconsolable, and he couldn't rule, he couldn't do anything, because he was just so miserable without her. And one of his grand viziers came up and made a shadow puppet of her. And every day he would come to the screen, the shadow puppet screen, and her image would come up in a shadow, and he would talk with her. And it, placate isn't the right word, but it assured him and made him feel loved and with comfort. And, in back to the Greek theater, what was the concept there? In the Greek plays, a lot of horrible things happen, but not on stage. They all happen off stage. So the concept was to purge people of villainous activities. And now theater is going into a state of, I'm probably putting my foot in my mouth on this one, but I believe art, you can certainly learn from art and from plays, but is there anything wrong with being entertained?
To quote a few artists, Creativity takes courage. Henry Matisse. If I could say it in words, there would be no reason to paint. Edward Hopper. I found I could say things with color and shapes that I couldn't say any other way. Things I had no words for. Georgia O'Keeffe. This is Hidden is brought to you by Southside 2-Bit Studios.